Hey guys, Daniel here with Value Investing with Daniel. Thank you for tuning into this video. This video is about the fact that sometimes securities are selling so cheaply that they're incredibly hard to resist. And the way to make the most money as possible as a value investor dealing with, let's say, smaller sums of money is to pay particular attention to those smaller companies that are trading at deep discounts to their intrinsic value. Now, intrinsic value is very hard to calculate, but what we can calculate is sort of a minimum reasonable price that a given security would be going for. What do I mean? Let's take a look at this particular company called Signet Jewelers, which is basically a jewelry company. They own a bunch of different jewelry stores and so forth. And we can look at their free cash flow over, let's say, basically their entire existence. And we can see that on average over the past 5 years per year, they've made about $958 million worth of free cash flows. $958 million. Now I've opened a spreadsheet here to show you what we can do with that number. So we have $958 million, and what we're going to be doing is growing it out, let's say, over the next 10 years. So in order to do that, we need a growth rate. We can look at what the revenue has been growing at over the last 10 years. And we can see that on average over the last 10 years, revenues have grown about 6% per year. But let's say we want to be conservative. We're only going to grow it out at about 5% per year. In fact, let's be even more conservative and say we're only growing it out at 4% per year. Okay? We'll only grow the revenues out at 4, or the free cash flow out at 4% per year. Now we're using revenue growth, which is even more conservative than using free cash flow growth, and we're using an even conservative growth rate, 4% versus 6%. And we're using the average free cash flow over the last 5 years rather than the peak free cash flows. So we're saying, okay, over the last 5 years, if we look at the annual rate, in 2022 it made $1 billion worth of free cash flow. Let's be conservative and just take the 5-year average at $958 million. Let's grow it very conservatively at 4% per year. Let's add them up and let's discount them the further out they go, since they're more uncertain and further out into the future. We get a value for this business at about $8.5 billion. Okay, $8.5 billion is a very conservative estimate for a business earning about $1 billion a year in free cash flow and growing at about 6% per year, but we're being conservative and saying it'll grow at about 4% per year. Discounting that to the present, we say, okay, a good value for the business would be $8.5 billion, meaning that seems like a fair value for this sort of business. And, with a 50% margin of safety, which is a huge margin of safety, we would say that $4.2 billion would be a fair purchase, a great purchase price for this sort of business. If we look at the enterprise value for this company, it's selling at $3.4 billion. We estimate its fair value to be 8.5. I mean, that is an incredible discount. Sometimes when you see securities that are so mispriced, it's extremely hard to resist, even though we prefer to buy companies that are wonderful at fair prices. Sometimes you find companies that are so underpriced for whatever reason, and buying companies like this, buying a handful of them, let's say somewhere between 5 and 10, will on average provide you with incredible results, because they're so undervalued that what's bound to happen over, let's say, the next 6 to 18 months is that the price of the security will eventually rise towards its intrinsic value, which we estimate to be about $8.5 billion. So the value is $8.5 billion. Let's give it a range of $1 billion. Let's say the intrinsic value is somewhere between, I don't know, $7 to $9 billion or something like that. But it's selling at 3.5. I mean, that's like a no-brainer, right? So when we find these no-brainers, if we find a couple of them, we can include them in our portfolio, despite them not being particularly excellent companies, just because of how cheap they're selling for, right? I'll give you another example of a company that's in my own portfolio, which is Sleep Country. So let's look at Sleep Country together. we can see here for Sleep Country, let me close this. If we look at the free cash flow of Sleep Country, we can see that it's making about $157 million a year, roughly. And, if we look at the annual numbers, we can see that it made 157, 172. Oh, let's do annual. So 132, 156, and 96. And it's saying that, okay, on average over the last 5 years it's made about 106 billion. But if we want to be a little bit more accurate, we can take 132 million that it made in 2021. We can take the 2020 number, 156, and we can take the trailing 12 months at 157, divide that by 3, and that'll give us an average sustainable free cash flow of about $148 million a year. Now, I don't really use spreadsheets, but I'm just using this to show you how cheap this company is compared to the free cash flows that it could be expected to make over the next 10 years. So if we say its sustainable free cash flows are 148 million, and we look at revenue growth over let's say the last 5 years or so, and we take the average over the last couple of years, which is 12%, let's be conservative and knock a little bit off of that and say it's only going to grow at 9% per year, not 12% like how it's been growing. So we can say 1.09% per year it'll grow, right? That gives us an intrinsic value of this company of somewhere around 1.7 billion. 1.7 billion, okay? So we're saying a good sustainable free cash flow base is about 148 million. That's what its sustainable free cash flows are currently. It can grow, it's been growing at 12% per year, but let's be conservative and say it's only going to grow at 9% per year. And if we add up all these free cash flows and discount them back to the present, we get a current value, roughly, of Sleep Country to be about 1.7 billion. Now, Sleep Country has some of the characteristics of a wonderful company, and part of the reason why I bought it was because it was both a wonderful company and selling at such a cheap valuation. I bought Sleep Country at about $20 per share. It's currently almost at 26, and I want to show you where I bought it at, looking at its current valuation in terms of the market. If we just look over the past year, when I bought Sleep Country was probably around here at about $770 million in terms of its enterprise value. We were valuing it at 1.7 billion. Okay, so I valued Sleep Country, let's say, at about 1.7 billion, and I bought it for about 750 million. Like, that is such a deep discount to its value that it was basically irresistible to me at that price when I saw it, despite it being such a small company, which is a good thing because the smaller securities are often more mispriced. So Sleep Country was selling at 750 million, and it's worth 1.7 billion. I mean, that was just such an incredible discount. And as you can see, what winds up happening is when the securities start reaching such low prices, they start to climb up relatively fast. We can see the same thing if you look at Meta, basically. Meta, a good fair value for Meta in terms of its enterprise value is about 590 billion. I mean, it was close to 220 or 200 even at the bottom, 200 billion. Oftentimes when you find securities with such amazing margins of safety of 50% or more, and you buy not just one but a handful of them, they will tend to perform extremely well and overall as a group rather than just relying on one security. So the purpose of this video is sometimes there's companies out there, particularly in the small cap and micro cap space, that are so mispriced basically that they're basically selling at a 60 or 70% discount to a conservatively estimated intrinsic value. And when you find those companies, if you can buy a handful of them and you're able to find a handful of them, they will perform extremely well. So even though our preference is to buy wonderful companies at good prices, sometimes you can buy mediocre companies at incredibly stupidly cheap prices and do extremely well, in the sense that you might be able to increase, you might be able to grow your portfolio like at 50 or 60% per year, provided that you're able to purchase a basket of these securities and at a sufficiently low price. So that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. Thanks.